welcome to this week's episode of Let's Talk Design. As I mentioned on my LinkedIn, but you may have missed, I will be changing the name from Let's Talk ID to Let's Talk Design. The reason for this is the podcast is going to be branching out and discussing many different topics all over various disciplines of design. That means we'll have architects, we'll have graphic designers, industrial designers, UX designers, as I believe that all designers, they speak the unique language of design, and across disciplines is not a far stretch. That means that the topics will be much more broad and we will go into all sorts of different topics. So it's a very exciting time and I hope you enjoy the next phase of the podcast. And along with the change of name and the change of topic, the branding has been changed of the podcast. And I'm very thankful that Dan Armstrong from Formswell Design has helped me out with the branding, and he offered at no cost to offer his services to the podcast, as he believes in the podcast and he believes in what I'm doing with the podcast, trying to get more design out there. And yeah, he's willing to help out and do all the branding. So I hope you enjoy the branding. I really like it personally. I asked pretty much exactly what he came up with, and he took my ideas and just went with it, and I'm really happy with how it went. And yeah, if you're looking for industrial design or graphic design, Dan Armstrong with Formswell Design is doing some great work out of Canberra. I wasn't even aware of their consultancy before Dan reached out to me on Instagram. Yeah, I definitely would recommend anyone who's looking for graphic design or industrial design services. He also does animations and a whole bunch of different things, to reach out and check out Formswell Design. A link to his website will be in the description, and his Instagram if you'd like to check it out. This week on Let's Talk Design, we have founder of Formswell Design, Dan Armstrong. Dan Armstrong is a very experienced industrial designer who's worked in the industry for many years, working for Breville back in the day, and then through his career moving back to Canberra and establishing his consultancy, Formswell Design, where he's doing some great work with the Canberra government and a whole bunch of different organizations, just true old-fashioned industrial design. And yeah, I really enjoyed talking to Dan, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, Dan. It's really great to have people reach out from around Australia who are interested to, come on the podcast and share their thoughts.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Roman. Thanks so much for having me. Like I've mentioned to you previously, I've listened to a bunch already, and geez, we've something that I've always actually thought about and wanted to hear more about, especially in Australia. As you know, industrial design is a small industry, and it's a really cool and great industry. And the more we talk about it, the more we, kind of share our thoughts and knowledge, I think the better. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I originally started kind of going off and interviewing people from overseas a lot. But with my full-time job, I've kind of brought it back home. But that's kind of what I wanted to do anyway, because I feel like, you can find podcasts around about the designers overseas, but sometimes the designers in Australia are quite hard to, they're not really out there speaking in public. So it's sometimes nice to hear their perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I think another thing, I think Nathan from Catapult really hit a couple of really good points on the idea of collaboration and talking to each other more. I think historically we might not have, because it feels like a competition. And business is a bit like that, especially other industries. You kind of, the quieter you are, the better. But I think if you think the opposite, it's great. It's a nice way to be. We can all learn from it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially in consultancies, I feel like, because they're always very low, very small scale, sometimes, it becomes a bit competitive trying to get the work, and, feeling like if you share the secret, maybe someone else will get that work. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think the opposite. I think if yourself as an industrial designer that's still in that sort of junior phase, and anyone else below you and above you, if there's more of that happening, I think the better I'm going to benefit from that, as well as all you guys. I think we all benefit from it, because if we can grow it and make it better, bigger and better, it's only a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the analogy of we've got a few cafes that we've worked for down here in the past, and we've talked about that, like the strip of cafes in the street. The idea that used to be like, if you want to be the only cafes that you take all the business, and where they're finding, if there's 10 on one street, they're all doing better, because it's actually a hub and it's people know where to go.
Yeah.
They all benefit from it. So I think that might be the same, hopefully, in industrial design.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose work to your differences, not necessarily to your similarities. Like work towards having a differentiator as a consultancy, opposed to just,
trying to get the work from someone else who maybe would be better at doing a certain thing.
And I think
Yeah.
once people are there and they understand why they're there and what industrial design is, or where to find those cafes, then they've got options and choice, and that's a good thing. And they're there and they understand. At least they're there in the first place. If they're just not there in the first place, or if they just don't understand design at all and don't know how to use it for their business, or the government doesn't understand how amazing industrial design can be for Australia, then in the first place we haven't even gotten to that point where we've got the worry of maybe too much competition or whatever. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Well, maybe just to start off, would you like to talk to your background as industrial designer and maybe discuss what Formswell is?
Yeah,
Formswell?
sure. Yeah, I started thinking about industrial design. An old girlfriend was into it. She was at UC in Canberra here, and I just thought, wow, that's. I went in there one day and I saw these little models and things. And it was so cool. And I was like, I've never heard of this. I don't know what it is, but I like it. And kind of forgot about it for a year or two and moved to Perth and did a few other things and didn't know what I was doing. And I was skydiving all the time. And I was starting to think about being a stuntman. And that was on the cards. And then I just kind of got to a point where I'm like, all right, I need to get serious now. I've been away from school for a few years. I'm going to be a stuntman, or this thing that I saw, which I really like, and I'm creative, and I like the idea of it. So I went for the industrial design thing, and I'm glad I did.
Mm.
My body probably would have lasted 10 years, in being a stuntman. Um, and yeah, applied for University of Canberra as a older student, like a 21-year-old, and got in, and it was the best thing I ever did because that's where I've met all my best mates and a whole bunch of things. So yeah, I came back to Canberra and just did 4 years. And it used to be, I'm not sure if for you, Roman, if it was 3 years.
Yeah, we did 3 years, but I did double degree with marketing, so it ended up being 5 years. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Marketing's a good one to do in
Mm.
conjunction. That's a good idea. Smart. Yeah, so it was always just 4 years. You had no choice. You did do
Mm.
4 years. And at the end I did honours and I got first class honours, so that kind of helped. That was all good. And a good thing that happened to me was in second year, Bottles of Australia, a company that was based down here that's now in Sydney, they came to the class and presented the idea of doing a whole semester on it as a project for them.
Mm.
And I think it was smart on their behalf because they got free design out of it and they got, 38 students, 38 ideas, and it was great for us because we got exposure and they came in, gave us a brief, gave us a few months. And basically at the end of it, me and one of my best mates, we won the opportunity to then go and work with Bottles of Australia, sort of in the holidays and around, and on weekends and things. We sort of made it happen, and we just took our designs to the next level and got them through to manufacturing, and they hit the market. And that was by the end of second and then into third year, we had a product on the market. It was like, whoa, it blew my mind. I thought that was so cool. And
Mm.
then they asked us to do a whole bunch more, and then we did the bottle carrier, which is now used in the NRL and the AFL. You see it on the TV all the time.
Yep.
We managed to pull that off in fourth year in like one of the computer rooms, not even a computer room actually. It was all getting fixed up, and we had to go into the air conditioning room for over summer holidays, and almost killed us. And we got it done. So a lot of CAD and getting that product ready for tooling and things.
Mm.
But by the end of so that meant that I got to end of the year, the 4 years, and was looking for my first job, and I had a couple of products on the market, which is I felt really grateful for that. And then I was lucky enough to go up to Sydney, sort of a week after our exhibition. No, sorry, we had an exhibition. We were really quite a good year, and we pushed for 3 exhibitions. So we did one in Melbourne, one
Mm.
in Canberra, and one in Sydney.
Wow.
It's pretty crazy.
Mm.
It was like 25 of us, and we all and that year's been great. Like there's a lot of guys in London working now and all around Australia and doing great things.
Mm.
And a whole bunch of us worked at Breville at one point as well. And yeah, we created a traveling or packable, exhibition that could do that. And a bunch of people got jobs from the Melbourne one, couple from Canberra, I think, and a whole bunch from Sydney. So it really worked, and it really paid off. And I was lucky enough to get approached by HWI, so Homewares International, who were owned by Breville at the time. So everything that Breville did that didn't have a motor in it. So, everything for the kitchen. And I started that role, and within a week of starting, I was in China. It was like, I didn't
Wow.
even know why I was going to China. The CEO went, "You're going to China?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then, so it was pretty nuts. And then a few months later, I was in India. And then, so I was just really lucky in that way. It was just a sort of a wild time, and it was all happening really quickly. I didn't really know what I was doing, but,
Mm.
something that I'd always say to people is don't, try not to, sometimes the people telling you what to do don't know why you're doing it. So just do it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Doing is better than worrying and not doing, So, yeah. So then, that I was at Housewares International, traveling to the US a fair bit as well, because we had an office over there, and we were selling a lot of the brands that Housewares International owned. Brands like Baccarat and Arca Steel and the Breville Homeware side of things, into the US market. So getting an understanding for what the marketing team in America wanted, um, as well as what we were doing here in Australia, and understanding how to transfer that in what you're designing,
Mm.
which I found really useful later on in life, and especially now. And then, yeah, I was about 3 years doing that, and then that business got sold, and the whole thing and all the brands within it got sold around Australia, and they're still going, those brands like
Mm.
Cambrook and things.
Yep.
They but they kind of got moved off into different companies, and that the main housewares got sold off. And Breville was across the road in Botany in Sydney, and I
Mm.
would go across there every day almost to use their 3D printer. And I got to know the guys.
Mm.
So, I was lucky. Out of about 180 people that left, I was probably me and another girl, I think, got a position the next day at Breville. So
Mm.
I grabbed my laptop and a few other things, and I walked across the road and started at Breville the next day. So I was really
Yeah.
lucky.
Wow. It's an interesting journey you've gone on. Like I feel like you've had a very fast track journey.
Yeah, the first few
Yeah.
years was, and looking back, it was stressful. I'd have to say it was. At the time, I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. I was like, "Oh, I'm so scared," and I'm going to China. I don't know why, and I've got like all this. I've got a whole bunch of designs in front of me, but how do I do that next thing? Because I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't gone through at least even 6 months of knowing how that works.
Mm.
I just kind of went, and then I kind of almost created an itinerary for myself to go, okay, let's try and ask them if they can do this and this and this, and get something out of this trip.
Mm.
'Cause I'm not sure if my boss understands what it is that he just, you're an industrial designer, go to China and do your thing. And that was that was sort of how it started. So it was really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, as the China trips progressed, it obviously they all meant something after a while, and we knew what we're doing. But the first 1 or 2 trips was definitely, yeah,
Mm.
figuring it out as I went.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
what brought about Formswell?
well, so I was at Breville then for about, geez, 5 or 6 years, I think it was, and then, um, designing, like, um, food processors, sandwich presses, all that kind of stuff. And you're typically on a project for about a year, and from a sketch right through to production, it might be a year to 18 months. And within that year, going to China and sometimes America, and until that product launches. So I was doing that, and then wanted to get out of Sydney, and we moved back to Canberra. And the first thing I did when I got back to Canberra was realize that there's no industrial design here, pretty much.
Mm.
And the first thing I did was get probably one of the only jobs you can get here, which is working at Questacon. Have you ever been to Questacon? It's kind of, if you, as a you know year 8 student, ever went to Canberra for a field trip.
I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, if you did, and it was mostly kind of probably people from New South Wales did it.
Mm.
I certainly did so I didn't grow up in Canberra. You'd go to Questacon, which is like the science kind of
Mm.
place. It's where kids can learn about science and interact with science, and it's really fun. And
Mm.
the government, I think, pretty much runs it and has the funding to do so every year. It was a gift from Japan in the 80s, I think. Um, yeah, so I worked there as an industrial designer and designed a few exhibitions, and that was only a 6-month contract. So, but it got me sort of a bridge over to into Canberra or somewhere different outside of Sydney, and then I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do, and I just didn't. I was going to give up industrial design, which kind of one freaked me out. Two was kind of sad to do that because it was an amazing. And I just thought, well, what do I do? I'll just get a job, I guess, and
Mm.
live in Canberra. And I was like, that lasted about 3 days, and then uh, I just started doing little jobs for people. And a person from Sydney that I knew had a little thing to do, and I spent 2 days on it and charged a small amount of money, and then something else and something else. And it just kind of really quietly grew. And then I went and worked for Bottles of Australia that we did that competition with, and they yeah, I was there for like 3 days a week, which is if I was to give anyone some advice on starting your own design business, it would be maybe just balance it for a bit,
Mm.
pay the bills with a job that gives some stability and some money, but
Mm.
definitely give yourself a few days a week to work on other things and cram it all in until you slowly pour more time and effort into the thing
Mm.
you really want to be doing. And that's exactly what I did for about 3 years, and then started Formswell.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when you messaged me on Instagram, I didn't even realize there was any consultancies in Canberra. But but it's great. Like, what kind of design scene is there in Canberra now? Has it developed, and has it developed because of your business, or is there other businesses around it?
Definitely it's developed big time. So the thing that's happening here in Canberra is furniture design, I'd
Mm.
say, primarily. And I'd say that's probably a little bit everywhere and possibly in Australia, especially Melbourne, fair bit up there in Brisbane. But Tom's skiing, so skiing, and a whole bunch of others. He's probably really driving and leading it. There's a heap of it, and it's really beautifully designed. Usually, it's quite high end. So Renee, that works for Formswell, he's does a side project which is called Furnished Forever, and they do amazing stuff as well,
Mm.
selling internationally and all around Australia. And yeah, I think the reason is because it's accessible. You can as an industrial designer create or designs some simple and functional furniture to start off with, at least, and get that made locally. You can source a guy that welds, you can
Mm.
source an upholsterer, you can source a timber guy, usually locally, and make it happen, which is pretty cool. You
Mm.
might get an order for 20 for a cafe and start there and move on
Mm.
from that point. And that's what most of the guys have done. And they've turned them in, like, if you check out Scan, like, man, he's doing amazing things. Um, and there's Industrious Design, who's another small industrial design company here. They've been going for a long time, way longer than us.
Okay.
And yeah, but that's about it. So
Mm.
it's pretty small. But we're connected. We're only a few hours that way and that way to Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah, it's a good central location. Yeah.
Yeah, we're lucky with bands and things or travel. Music. That was always the case, especially back in the day when
Mm.
people would go from Sydney to Melbourne. They'd do a stopover, and we'd get
Mm.
the international acts and things because of that.
Mm. Oh, cool. Well, what are your biggest challenges you found along the way starting a consultancy, in Canberra or in general? What kind of advice would you give to someone looking to start their own consultancy?
Um, Understanding the business side of things is obviously a big part of it. And just depending on who you are, how much confidence you've got. But confidence, I see confidence being a problem when I still do a little bit of teaching at university here in Canberra. I see year after year where people feel like they just don't, they don't know what's next or what to do, or how to attack a complete project
Mm.
or even part of. And starting your own business is the same thing. Can I actually do this? Am I good enough to be an industrial designer, charging someone money or in a business for money? And can I pull this off? because
Mm,
it looks pretty complex, this thing that we're and how we're going to get there. We've got a year to do it or 6 months, and I think the biggest advice for that would be just to start simple if you can. So it might be a simpler type of product. There might be 2 parts rather than 180.
mm,
That might be a general way forward, and also just giving it a go, just
mm,
getting in there and understanding that you're actually way better than you imagined by the time you get out of uni. You've already got a certain type of brain that's been molded around a little bit in that design world, and there's a lot to say for that. And people that in a sales team or they're coming to you from a different point of view, um, you've already got that over a lot of people in that area, and it's invaluable and it's worth an hourly rate and it's all those things. Sometimes you just don't know that. You haven't seen that yet, but you already are. You've already done design thinking. You've already done a whole bunch of stuff that
mm.
that people are paying for, and it's in there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I when I graduated, I had a few months where I didn't have a job. And like to be honest, I'm just like I get really I get like cabin sick if I don't do something major in my in my life. So I just was like getting bored of waiting for the role to come up and just like basically went out and like started trying to like start a consultancy basically. Not even start a consultancy, but just like get some experience, some work. And I started to get work come in. Unfortunately, I didn't even get to go through with any of it because then I ended up getting a job. But I don't know. I feel like it wasn't that hard necessarily to get work as a graduate. Like I just went around to a whole bunch of manufacturers and yeah, different businesses that seemed like they maybe would need a designer for something, and got a few people who were like, yeah, I'd be happy with get you on doing some design for molds in injection molding, or like I've got people who come to me with an idea that I just need someone to do design work to get it to the point of manufacturing, things like that. And like I probably would have had a bit of work if I'd stayed in Brisbane at the time. So like I would say to anyone who's like in that stage where they're not really sure if they should move out on their own, even just like get a bit of work on the side just to get some more experience in that way, because then you probably would build your self-confidence because you would know you'd be able to do that bit of work that you've picked up.
yeah. And what you've done there, the reason why you got that job is because you were doing that. I would dare say, without you doing that initial exploration into, hey, can I do this myself? While you were doing that, you picked up a job. That's not a coincidence, I don't think. I think someone's seen that in you, and you're like, oh yeah, this is great. Let's do this. Um, but yeah, I think you've hit on something pretty big there, which I think I was probably similar to you in that I just went out there and just asked questions and looked into how I can do things myself,
Mm,
or also like I was always interested as a kid or growing up I kind of like the idea of also working behind the scenes in movies and things. And I think that's the same of what you were doing by exploring and asking questions is it's looking behind the curtain or looking behind
mm,
the camera and seeing how things are made and how things are done. And there's something really interesting about that. And I think
mm,
industrial designers have got that in them. Um, and by knowing more about how things are created and made and come to life, the
mm.
better, and that's what we do. I think.
Yeah, I suppose in the same way, like as a student, you kind of put professional designers who are in industry up on a pedestal, and you feel like you're not really anywhere, like you're going to really struggle to ever get to their level. But I found through the podcast that quite often these people are just everyday people that happen to have worked in the industry for many years, and like anyone who puts the effort in is going to get there one day. And like that's kind of like that's one of the best thing I've learned from the podcast, like just to start not thinking of people on a pedestal kind of thing. Just think of everyone as a level that you might one day get to if you work at it. Um, but yeah, like I think as a graduate, sometimes it can be daunting thinking how are you ever going to stack up to these people who are already in industry. But there's always going to be jobs that'll get you there. You just got to work at it. Yeah.
Now you're already at that same pedestal that you're talking about for other younger people saying, how's this guy doing this podcast? Like, I can't only imagine doing that. You know what I mean? You've already done it. You've already done a version of that.
Mm. Yeah.
And exactly like in 10 years, you'll be yeah. I couldn't imagine it. I was very much worried and scared and all those things, as a lot of us go through. I remember getting to Breville going, wow, there's no way. Like, look at that product over there, that beautiful toaster.
Mm,
How do I go from this sketch to that? Like, I just
mm,
couldn't. It just felt like such a massive leap. But just sitting in the process and
mm.
doing it and being there for years, and you start to see the mistakes and what works and what doesn't. Yeah, you just you build and get somewhere one day, and you suddenly look back and go, oh yeah, wow.
Yeah. Do you see the industry in Canberra growing and maybe Canberra becoming a design hub? Or do you think there's always going to be Sydney and Melbourne that are kind of up on that level?
Maybe based purely on population.
Mm,
It might be always just that bit smaller or whatever, but it might be similar to Brisbane
mm,
in that there is the big two, Sydney and Melbourne, but
mm,
um, Canberra government is pretty good. But they're pumping money into things like Canberra Innovation Network, which
mm,
is somewhere where entrepreneurs can go. And every first Wednesday of every month, there's pitches, 1 minute pitch of your business idea as an entrepreneur. And what happens is they usually get picked up if if it's a good idea and people respond to it, and they're
mm,
given like grants and stuff, and then they connect. I'm standing in the crowd with some marketing people and some social media guys, and then there's manufacturing people hanging around, and so we're all there listening to these ideas, and then we all chat afterwards, and it's really good. And the government spends a few million a year on that, giving, and then certain people are asked to come back and pitch their product in a more formal way with a bit more kind of um, content behind it. So, what's your recommended retail price on this? What's your business plan? And then a part of that would usually be what is the product, and that's where we step in and can help these clients go to that next meeting or that next level,
mm.
and we create their first ever presentation of design and things of what it is. So that's pretty good.
That's
That's a
awesome.
good,
That's awesome that they're
yeah.
putting the money into that. Yeah.
It's really good. And what happens is we get, because we work for, we'll get into it in a minute, a bit later about what we do, but we work for, international companies, but also little, like Nathan at Catapult was saying, everywhere from your sort of mums and dads backyard business right through to the international
Mm,
larger clients. And the smaller ones come to us, and we can usually say, hey, your next step is to go back to Canberra Innovation because you need like this much money to then go to the next stage with us. Here is what that will cost from our point of view. Here's what that looks like. Go and talk to them about this, and then they can get funding to come back to us. So that's pretty good. It's like, don't kind of go and get a loan from the bank to work with us. If you're a small business, you can actually go and ask for help from the government, which is, if there was more of that in Australia, I'm not sure it'd be a good thing.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it keeps your business going as well because you have kind of that regular flow of startups and people who are interested in, creating a product. Yeah.
Exactly. Everyone benefits. Like, then the guy who's prototyping for us a few weeks later is benefiting from it, and so is the manufacturer down the road doing some laser cutting for us or whatever it might be. Everyone definitely benefits, and I think the government here understands that, because what ultimately they're trying to do is create jobs and create an environment down here of innovation and stuff happening basically. So if you can get that person and give them that bit of a push, and they've got that extra 100K for the next year to make that happen, which they didn't have previously, it might mean that they can employ 5 people the year after, which is great for the government, right? And
Yeah.
everyone else. So it makes
Yeah.
sense. It just totally makes sense.
That's the thing. Sometimes only small stimuluses can have such an effect on the greater economy. I mean, we've spoken about it in the podcast before, but like the loss of the Australian car manufacturing industry, like had such an impact on design, manufacturing, everything. And like I suppose things like this are in a small way kind of contributing to bringing some sort of capacity back to Australia. Mm,
Yeah, and we don't want to be left behind, right? And we yeah, there's a lot of smart people here, and we can do it. We just need everyone needs help, everyone. Um, and it's not just a person sitting in a room coming up with an idea, creating a product, and going to market. It's a lot more than that. And but yeah, um, but Canberra's definitely getting there.
that's
It's
awesome.
it's it's definitely bubbling along, and it's great, and it's actually more livable these days, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, awesome. But yeah, what type of projects do you guys take on? And yeah, like maybe a project that you've done recently that you'd like to talk to, and yeah, the challenges and the benefits of it. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll just quickly overview of Formswell a little bit. So just so you know who we are. So we've been around for about 6 or 7 years. So like I said, I started because kind of needed to, and there wasn't much else in Canberra, and then got going, and then quickly after that, I employed Renee Linson. And Renee's still here, and he's awesome. He's a senior designer now, and he's got Furnish Forever, like I spoke about, and he also has won a bunch of awards over the last few years. So he won the Alessi International Alessi Award, and they flew him over there and stuff
Oh,
recently. That was pretty amazing. And we've got Jack here now as well, who's a graduate from 1 or 2 years ago from Canberra. And we've had a couple other people here and there, but really it's just the three of us that do the daily work, and then we pull in other people when we're doing bigger jobs. So we do stuff for government here as well, and when it's bigger and it's a longer time frame for the project, we pull in some contractors as well.
hmm.
Um, and yeah, so we work with brands like Curtis Stone, that chef guy. He's over in LA. We do all of his, bunch of his help with his products, but a lot of his animations as well, and packaging and instruction booklets and all that kind of stuff as well. Also in the US, Cuisinart, they're a big housewares brand, so we do their barbecue sort of range year in year out. And that's sort of there's a few other bits and pieces that we do in the US, and the rest is mostly here. So we do everything from, like I say, the government. So the light rail project's the big one in Canberra, and we do a lot of their visualization. We work with a company called Spatial Media, and we partner with those guys, and we work. We do a whole bunch of the project, and they do a whole bunch, and we kind of they're big, so we get them their help. And then we do, yeah, so we work for ASICS at the moment, ASICS here in Australia. So we're doing a bunch of bags for those guys at the moment. In the past, we've done bottles and things like just sports accessories,
Hmm.
because all their shoes are done in Kobe, still in Japan.
Yep.
A little bit of stuff for Puma as well in the past. And yeah, a whole bunch of what are we working on at the moment? A big one lately has been on a coffee. So they're here in Canberra, but they're doing really well internationally and around Australia, and they're kind of Sasha, the CEO, is sort of the Justin Bieber at the moment of coffee in the world.
Mm.
He's like and it's no joke, he really is. It's like wherever you go, you kind of can't talk to him because he's got like a lineup of people that want to meet him and stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
We got Yeah, I went to a coffee expo in Melbourne last year, and I was just like, wow. But yeah, they've got a company called Nucleus, and we do all their innovation, coffee innovative products. It's got the whole bunch of stuff that if you weren't really into coffee, you wouldn't even know what they did, these things.
Hmm.
But they're in Athens today at the moment, and they've just launched a product that we just designed for them. We fast tracked it and got them prototypes and stuff, and it's just the winner the of the big trophy every year, the espresso coffee barista championships, just won yesterday, and he used the product.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, so that's how they launch. So great way to launch things, that they've got that capacity. So yeah, we've been delving deep on coffee, which is not a
I'll have to check
bad
out his
thing.
coffee. Sounds great.
Yeah, on a ONA, and check out the Nucleus, which is their other brand. Which this is the stuff we do, and yeah, if you like coffee like we do, it's probably good because we can. I've still got my connections to Breville as well, and that's a whole bunch of coffee that goes on there, and then bridging into this stuff has been really good, and understanding coffee to a bit of a crazy level is
Mm.
a whole other world. Like anything, when
Mm.
you delve deep enough into anything, it's like, oh wow, I thought I knew a bit about coffee,
Down the
but I
rabbit
don't.
hole.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, sure it'll be better than the Aldi pod coffee machine I have at my work.
Uh, yeah, totally. I'd hope so. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
Oh, that's
but
awesome.
yeah.
But you've moved obviously through the industry over a few years. What major changes have you noticed in the industrial design community that you'd like to talk about, and what changes are you excited for in the future?
I think I left uni in 2004. So what's that? That's almost 20 years I've been in the industry. So I think the biggest thing was obviously technology changes. So
Mm.
I remember like the rendering style of coming out of, well, there wasn't any such thing as Keyshot, but you'd render out of a few other programs, and it was like a certain style. I remember the day that Spotlight was invented, was called. I think it was Spotlight, and it just blew our minds. It just made things look real all of a sudden. We're
Mm.
like, whoa. So and then there's just been those changes every few years, which is always, that's what I love about industrial design. There's always something cool and new to see. A
Mm.
bit like music, if you're into music,
Mm.
and like guitar pedals and things, there's always something totally awesome to check out every 6 months. Um, so I think that's a big part of it. And um, the idea of tracking, so like carbon footprints and things like that, that's getting big with all the the access to data that we have now. So
Mm.
I remember we tracked a project in third year from start of life to end of life as a project,
Mm.
um, considering all things. So getting it from China, sort of plane size fuel involved. I really went deep on it. I remember that we could do that back then, which was 2002 or 2003, which was great. Now the level that you can go into now is
Mm.
amazing. So I think there's those things, but we've started using the Oculus in the last couple of years, which has been pretty handy for us for the government work mostly.
Mm.
So we've got government clients that we give Oculus to, and they can walk around the new design and cross the road and jump on a light rail. So we've actually 3D'd built the whole light rail system in Canberra, and
Awesome.
you can get on the light rail itself and actually look around the light rail and walk up and down it and look out to see what it feels like to cross the bridge at the
Mm.
Commonwealth Bridge in Canberra, which has never been done before. And they can do it before they obviously do it, or construct it, and kind of make decisions and go like, "Oh, that feels too high over that ledge." It didn't never really crossed our minds, and it's actually been like quite effective.
Mm.
I think things like the Oculus can be a bit of a gimmick sometimes. You buy one, you get it
Mm.
in your office, and you sort of it collects dust after a bit. You wish it was more than that, but it
Mm.
kind of isn't sometimes.
Mm.
But we've actually used that piece of kit a bit.
What do you use for the modeling of the space?
For the whole
Yeah.
thing. So it's what happens is we usually receive data from the government. So
Mm.
that'll be from AECOM, or one of the big, engineering firms.
Yeah.
So for usually DWG, 3D DWGs is what sort of the standard is. And we'll chuck small details into SolidWorks and things like that,
Yeah.
and export them into, whether it's, if we're doing animation, it might be um, 3D cinema. It might be. It just depends on what we're doing with it at that point.
Sure.
For the Oculus stuff, we work with Spatial Media on a big kiosk that we give to the government, and they can. It's like playing a computer game. They can just walk through the city, and they can. It's all
Wow.
touchscreen. It's really cool, and you can look under the ground and see what the utilities are. You can get on the light rail or the bus, or be a person in a wheelchair, or be a cyclist. Click on the cyclist, jump, be in point of view of that person, and go across the bridge or go around a corner that's just been designed. And you can take a video of that. You can do really beautiful renderings from that. They can email it to themselves. It's really cool.
Mm.
But
For
that's
that
all.
kind of application, VR makes so much sense. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And you just literally have the VR app and plug it in, and it reads each other, and it's amazing. It just kind of works, which is nice.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we obviously we've spoken about VR and AI extensively on the podcast. And I feel like in a lot of ways it does feel like a gimmick. Like I used Gravity Sketch for my final subject at final assignment at uni. Just for this, like I designed a motorbike in it, and did like the rest of it in SolidWorks and like combined it together. And it was an interesting process, but I found um I don't know. I just don't think I could model like that regularly. Like it was like
Mm.
frying my brain for one. Every night I was going to sleep and I was just awake all night from the blue light. And because I spent so long to design the motorbike in like all the different parts of it, it just felt like it was too long in VR.
Right.
For that kind of thing, I don't really see it becoming a thing. But for visualization and experiencing something in the 3D space makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, the first 5 minutes, no, let's call it the first half an hour when you're grabbing the pen and you can walk through that thing you just
Yeah,
drew, and you're like, oh, this is it. This
yeah.
is the future.
Yeah, I
We're
remember
not going back.
I called him, I borrowed my friend's Quest 2 and I called him up and I was like, mate, this is the future of 3D modeling. And then I bought my own and then like a week later I was like, I'm so over this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that time frame of like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, right. I've gone back to SolidWorks or whatever, and yeah, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think obviously that works really well for companies like Oculus and stuff because that initial feeling is
Mm,
just almost like addictive. It's amazing, and that's when you do that purchase, right? And
mm.
you're in. You've already paid your money and
Yeah.
you're $600, and but then unfortunately it might just sit on the bench for
Mm,
for a bit after that, but. It happened here in our office. We're in a office where there's a whole bunch of different businesses here,
yeah.
and we kind of got caught onto the trend of it because we saw other people using it. So there's this guy here who has lived all around the world, and he's quite a young guy, and he runs his own software company. And he was like, "Check out this," and we were having a go, and he was spending about 7 hours a day at some point in the Oculus in metaverse, right?
Yeah.
And because he quickly figured out all the range of what you can use with that thing.
Mm.
So he was doing the office, he was doing all the Teams meet in the virtual room. He had his avatar set up properly. We were just delving in and out of it, but he really used the whole thing properly. And he was doing, you'd look in his office and he had nothing in there. He didn't need it because he had his virtual desk, he had his virtual everything set up. And then suddenly you'd see him be doing this, and he's having a live session with a guy in the US, a live gym session and stuff, and then going back to work, and it was so funny in some ways.
This is such a Black Mirror circumstance.
Totally,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know
yeah.
if
Well,
I don't know if I can do it. Like I like the idea in some ways. Like I definitely see the appeal of remote work. Like it'd be nice to be able to work from home. And I mean in industrial design it's not necessarily an option a lot of the time because you know it's a very collaborative field. A lot of the time you need to have that contact with someone. And for that way I feel like VR is important and it could be interesting. But I still just don't know if I could do like 7, 8 hours a day every day in VR. Like unless it
mm,
got really, really good and somehow didn't have any eye strain and didn't feel like you were looking at a screen. But yeah.
yeah,
Don't know if I could do it.
yeah. He doesn't anymore, just like we don't.
Yeah. Well,
But
he,
now he's buying the new Apple one, which is when as soon as it comes out, I think so that one looks pretty amazing. So
yeah, that one looks insane, but 3.5 grand.
yeah,
Yeah.
full blown computer. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah.
What aspirations do you have for your consultancy, and where are you excited for the future?
I think for us is working more with the larger firms, not just because of money and what comes along with that, but the idea of companies that understand why they are coming to you with a brief, for industrial design. They sometimes, like ASICs, already have a design, a product pipeline in a certain area. And they're looking for how to innovate for 2 years from now, and they're planning, and they understand kind of, I guess, budgets and a whole bunch of other things. And there's something quite nice about that because you're locked into a part of that business and you're doing your bit the best as you can. And everyone from the get go kind of understands what's next and where we need to be. And there's something really great about that. With the sort of smaller backyard kind of startup clients, we really enjoy it because every day is different, and there's always a new interesting product that comes along that we get to delve right into and work on. But the sort of downside to it maybe is that sometimes is that especially as a director or a manager in design, you spend more than half of your life explaining what is next or what the industrial design process is or what industrial design even is. And that's great. And you need to be doing that anyway. But man, some days you wish you didn't have to do it every day, So,
Write a book
so
and be
yeah,
like, here's this book, read this and come back to me.
totally. Yeah. And no one most people that haven't ever delved into or used industrial designers really don't understand what's next, and that's understandable. So you just, we're all educators, you know. You're doing it already with this podcast. You start from probably first or second year of uni, because you go and start telling your parents what the hell, you know, industrial design is. And we're doing it all the time, all of us, I think, industrial designers, because we're not just talking about the industry, but we're talking about the newest, latest, coolest 3D software or whatever it is. And so we're spreading industrial design in that way, I think. But yeah, so I would like to think that in the next few years, we sort of solidify some of the projects and some of the bigger clients that we've already got, but just make sure that they're really happy with what we do. And we're always doing a really amazing job for them, so they want to come back to us. That's kind of one part of the business. And I don't have big aspirations of growing for growing's sake. I've got friends, and I've seen people that have got, like, you know, over 100 employers, and they've worked hard, and they've gotten to that level. And I can see what that is, and I can see what a small business is, and I can, you know, and I can sort of look at it all and choose, I think, sometimes. And I don't know where I'd want to be after seeing all the differences. I've got 2 kids, and I mountain bike ride, and I want to do those things as well, and be an awesome industrial designer if I can be, if that's, you know, strive to that, and also have a really cool business. That's probably enough. Anything outside of that starts to be like, it starts to stretch you a bit. So
yeah, it's good to know when to focus on the things that are important.
Yeah. What I wanted to do when I first started was to be a legitimate industrial designer, and then when we started in Formswell, it was the same, but be a legitimate industrial design business, and actually have people look at us, come to us, and ask us for, you know, to do industrial design work for them and pull it off. And we've done it for 7 years, and it's still a great feeling to be able to feel like you can do it. You're so uncertain of it for so long. And so we just want to get better and better at that, and we want to be trustworthy, and we want to do a great job, and that's kind of what drives us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're really passionate about industrial design, it doesn't necessarily feel like a job a lot of the time. Like, it just kind of feels like you're doing something that you enjoy anyway, and you're just making money from it. And I suppose in your situation, you've kind of followed that dream and made it into a reality, which is great.
Yeah. And trying to be grateful for it too is a big one. I think I walk downstairs and go for a coffee and see the construction site next door, and see some of the tough jobs in freezing conditions down here in camp. Today is like stupidly cold. I can see the snow on the mountains out here. And, you know, you're out there for 8 hours a day, and it's like, man, I'm lucky. I'm just going to grab my coffee and go back upstairs and get back into some sketching or some, you know, industrial design. Like, I'm so lucky. Like, I try to not forget that, you know. And for every day to be different, you know, like, even could be still in an office environment, and, you know, have it pretty good, and but I might be on spreadsheets all day or whatever. My brain couldn't. A lot of us industrial designers probably couldn't even fathom that, because what we do is so broad, and there's so many bits and pieces within that, you know, range of industrial design, that every day is different, and that's how we like it, right? So I guess just being grateful for that's a really good thing, I think. So
yeah,
I think it helps, especially when you're first starting to, and you might be on quite a low wage in industrial design. It helps at that level. He's like, I'm not making enough money, and you know, my rent's way too high for this.
Yeah. I mean, when you start off, it's definitely for a passion, because, like, there's jobs you could go into where you would get paid a lot more money, but, you know, a lot of the time the people who actually pursue it and follow it as a career to the end, they're not doing it for money, they're doing it for passion, and that's where it differentiates at that point.
Really. I remember thinking that when I left uni, I was like, I thought we're going to make like 100 grand the first year. I think there's a lot of stuff that you don't get taught at uni that you probably should. One of them's like, hey, the expectations on money, just you need to wait. But it can happen. Like, you know, if you're successful enough, it's like, it can be much better than a lot of other professions. So, it's just concentrating on being good and enjoying it first, and then other things might come, hopefully. So,
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on today, Dan. Might wrap it up there. But yeah, it was awesome to have you on and awesome to learn more about your journey and how you've come to where you are today.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much for having me, Roman.
Yeah, and yeah, keep following the podcast, and it'd be awesome to get you back on another time to discuss design. I had a group podcast the other day, and it'd be really great to have another group podcast. I was thinking with a few consultancy owners from different parts of Australia all together in one room, well, in one podcast. And yeah, I think it'd be
Yeah,
interesting to hear the differences in different states and the different journeys people have been on. Yeah, it'd be awesome.
yeah. I would definitely reach out to some Canberra guys like skiing if I was you as well, and have a chat to those guys. And yeah, that'd be awesome.
Oh, cool, awesome. Thanks, mate.
No worries.
See
Thanks a
you
lot.
later.